There's a fuel tank sitting behind a hospital right now, somewhere in Florida, fully topped off and connected to a diesel generator that hasn't run since its last monthly test. The fuel looks fine. It smells normal. On paper, everything is ready for the next hurricane. Category 4, Category 5, it doesn't matter. The generator is supposed to carry the load the moment the grid drops. But at the very bottom of that tank, beneath 500 gallons of diesel, there's a thin layer of water, maybe a quarter inch, that condensed out of humid summer air through the tank's vent. And at the boundary, where that water meets the fuel above it, something is alive. What's growing there is what the industry calls the diesel bug. It isn't a malfunction or a chemical reaction. It's a living colony of fungi and bacteria that feeds on the hydrocarbons in diesel fuel, even in complete darkness. As it grows, it produces acid, the kind that slowly eats through a steel tank wall from the inside, a process that corrosion engineers formally call microbiologically influenced corrosion, or MIC. By the time anyone notices, the generator's fuel filters will be clogged with a brown sludge that technicians sometimes describe as looking like coffee grounds. And the only moment this ever gets discovered is the worst possible one. When the grid goes down, the automatic transfer switch fires, and the generator chokes on its own fuel supply. The industry has a name for it. They call it the diesel bug. The first thing most people get wrong is the name. Diesel bug sounds like a single pest, and online forums often call it algae. But algae needs sunlight to survive, and the inside of a sealed fuel tank is pitch black. What actually lives in there is a community, a whole ecosystem of microorganisms layered on top of each other in the small gap where water meets fuel. The dominant species is a fungus called Hormoconis resinae, also known by its older taxonomic name Cladosporium resinae. Microbiologists sometimes refer to it as the kerosene fungus because it was first identified not in diesel but in jet fuel, a detail we'll come back to. It grows as a mat of branching filaments right at the fuel-water boundary, pulling hydrocarbons from the diesel above and moisture from the water below. The sheer volume of biomass it produces is what makes it dangerous. A bacterial colony might be microscopic for weeks, but Hormoconis resinae builds visible, slimy mats that can grow over a centimeter thick. Beneath that fungal layer, the ecosystem gets more hostile. Aerobic bacteria near the surface consume whatever oxygen enters through tank vents, and that creates an oxygen-free zone underneath where a different class of bacteria thrives. Sulfate-reducing bacteria that generate hydrogen sulfide as a metabolic byproduct. That's the source of the acid that attacks steel, the mechanism behind MIC, microbiologically influenced corrosion. And it's why what looks like a thin film of residue at the bottom of a tank is actually a stratified, self-sustaining biological system, with each layer creating the conditions the next one needs to survive. Diesel bug isn't new. It has been documented since at least the 1950s. But for most of that history, the fuel itself kept the problem in check. Not through any additive or engineering, but through something that was simply part of how diesel was refined: sulfur. Before the EPA began tightening emission standards, American diesel fuel contained as much as 5,000 parts per million of sulfur. That sulfur was a pollutant. It produced acid rain and particulate emissions, but it also made the fuel inhospitable to most microorganisms. The diesel bug existed, but it rarely grew fast enough to cause serious problems in standby generator tanks. Then, the rules changed. Between 2006 and 2014, the EPA phased in ultra-low sulfur diesel across every category: highway, off-road, locomotive, marine. The new limit was 15 parts per million, a reduction of more than 99%. The air got cleaner and the soot went down, but the fuel also lost its built-in biocide. Ultra-low sulfur diesel meets ASTM D975, the primary specification standard for diesel fuel, but ASTM D975 sets no requirements for microbial resistance. The standard was written for chemistry, not biology. Around the same time, biodiesel blending became more common. Biodiesel is made from plant oils and animal fats, which means it holds more water than petroleum diesel and provides richer nutrition for microbial growth. The combination created a perfect storm for the diesel bug, a fuel that was cleaner, greener, and far more biologically vulnerable than anything that had come before it. The same regulatory change that made diesel exhaust safer to breathe made the fuel in a backup generator more dangerous to trust. This is where the kerosene fungus earns its name. In the 1950s, British and American military mechanics started finding unexplained corrosion inside the sealed wing tanks of jet aircraft. The fuel in those tanks was clean when it went in. The tanks were airtight. Nothing should have been growing in there. And yet something was eating through the aluminum from the inside. The culprit turned out to be Hormoconus resinae, Cladosporium resinae as it was called then, the same fungus that colonizes diesel generators today. It had found a habitat in the thin film of condensation that forms inside aircraft fuel tanks during altitude changes, and it was producing acids that pitted the aluminum alloys used in wing structures. By 1965, the problem had grown severe enough to threaten grounding the entire DC-9 fleet. The aviation industry responded with a chemical fix. A company called Hammond's Fuel Additives developed a dual-phase biocide named BioBor-JF, the first product specifically designed to kill microbial growth in hydrocarbon fuels. It worked. Combined with strict water drain protocols and regular tank inspections, BioBor-JF brought the kerosene fungus under control. It remains the only biocide approved for use in aviation jet fuel to this day. The generator industry never adopted that same discipline. A standby diesel generator might sit untested for months between exercising cycles, with fuel aging in a tank that nobody samples. Aviation learned to respect the diesel bug 60 years ago. The backup power world, for the most part, still hasn't. The destruction works from two directions at once. The fungal mats and bacterial colonies produce a dark, viscous sludge, a biomass that breaks loose from the tank walls and gets pulled into the fuel line during operation. It clogs the primary fuel filter within minutes. If the filter bypasses or collapses under pressure, the contamination reaches the injectors and the engine stalls. That's the mechanical failure path, the one that shows up as a no start during a hurricane. There's a parallel failure mode worth understanding alongside the diesel bug: wet stacking. When a diesel generator runs for extended periods at low load, which happens when a facility keeps a generator idling just to maintain power to non-critical systems, unburned fuel accumulates in the exhaust system. Wet stacking accelerates carbon buildup and can mask early signs of fuel quality problems because a wet-stacked engine already runs poorly regardless of whether the fuel is contaminated. The two problems compound each other. But the subtler damage happens even when the generator never runs. The sulfate-reducing bacteria at the bottom of the tank converts sulfate into hydrogen sulfide, which reacts with the steel to form iron sulfide, a black, powdery deposit that marks the beginning of pitting corrosion. Over months, those pits deepen. One fuel industry source claims that under extreme conditions, certain bacteria can perforate 5 millimeters of stainless steel in a single month. Even if that figure represents a worst case, the underlying mechanism, acid-producing microbes dissolving metal from the inside, the definition of MIC, is well established in the corrosion engineering literature. The Department of Energy uses a planning heuristic sometimes called the one-thirds rule. Roughly a third of standby generators fail to start, another third fail within the first 12 hours of operation, and only the remaining third perform as intended. A peer-reviewed study published in Applied Energy in 2020 confirmed that poorly maintained emergency diesel generators are only about 80% reliable after 12 hours of a power outage. The study identified fuel contamination and starting battery failure as the leading causes. For hospitals, this isn't just an operational concern. It's a regulatory one. The Joint Commission, which accredits healthcare facilities across the country, requires compliance with NFPA 110 as a condition of accreditation. That means a hospital's entire emergency power supply system, its EPSS, including the generator, the transfer switch, and the fuel supply, must meet documented maintenance and testing standards. A diesel bug problem isn't just an engineering failure in that context. It's a compliance failure that can cost a facility its accreditation. The diesel bug is not an unsolvable problem. Aviation proved that 60 years ago. But stopping it requires accepting one uncomfortable fact. You cannot tell whether your fuel is contaminated just by looking at it. Diesel that appears clear and smells normal can be heavily colonized at the bottom of the tank, where nobody checks unless they're specifically trained to. NFPA 110, the National Standard for Emergency and Standby Power Systems, requires a fuel quality test at least once a year using recognized ASTM methods. ASTM-D 6469 is the primary guide for microbial contamination in fuels and fuel systems, and it works in tandem with ASTM-D 975, which governs overall diesel fuel quality. Rapid on-site test kits exist that can detect Hormoconis resinae specifically without sending samples to a laboratory. The technology is there. The question is whether anyone uses it. Beyond testing, prevention comes down to controlling what the bug needs to survive. Water. Keeping a tank full reduces the condensation space above the fuel, and draining the bottom on a regular schedule removes the water layer where the colony establishes itself. Fuel polishing systems circulate the diesel through multi-stage filters that strip out moisture and particulate, typically passing the fuel through a coalescing filter to separate water, then through progressively finer particulate filters, and sometimes through a final polishing stage before returning clean fuel to the tank. For large standby systems, continuous or scheduled fuel polishing has become a recognized best practice precisely because it addresses both biological contamination and the general fuel degradation that comes with long storage. And for tanks where contamination has already taken hold, the same biocide that saved the DC-9 fleet, Biobor JF, is still in production and still effective more than 60 years after it was first formulated. The diesel bug doesn't need much, just water and a little time. Most standby generators offer both.